Welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. Currently, we are in Romans chapter 3. And we're going to continue on as we are unpacking what salvation is. And I would say the assurance of salvation. But first, what Paul is telling us is why we need to be saved. And the reason is that we are not good in God's sight. That's why we're not good. And then as we move on, we're going to see why, but we're not good. All of us, when God looks at us, he sees wretchedness, unprofitable. We're not profitable for God. He looks at us as evil. He looks at us as bad. You offer nothing. You cannot do good enough. So let me just jump to it. And let me jump to it. And I'm going to go back to verse 19. And remember, in the previous verses, he said that there is no one righteous, not even one. There is no one that understands. There is no one who seeks God. There is all have turned away. All alike have become useless. There is no one who does what is good, not even one. In verse 19, now we know that whatever the law says, it speaks to those who are subject to the law, so that every mouth may be shut and the whole world may become subject to God's judgment. For no one would be justified in his sight by the works of the law, because the knowledge of sin comes through the law. Now, I want to do something a little different here, because I want to define the words. And the reason why I'm saying that is because in order to break the brainwashing that we have, what happens is when we read scriptures like this, if the words do not register in terms of the meaning, then it's kind of like just kind of empty words. We have no cognitive understanding of what is being said. And that, in other words, we know what law means. We know what these words mean, but the one thing is that we're not kind of understanding or connecting them cognitive. Okay. Now I'm going to define these words, and then I'll come back and then we'll pack them in context. Let's kind of first go back, and let's first look at, let's go back to verse 9, when he says, verse 10, he says, as it is written, I'm sorry, as it is written, no, verse 9, I'm sorry. He says, what then are we better? Are we any better? Not at all. We have previously charged that both Jews and Gentiles are all under sin. So what is the definition of sin? Well, the kind of the English word for sin, it means to miss the mark. And the English word is used as in terms of archery. So if you think about archery, you see a big bullseye, and when they would pull back and they would shoot the arrow, and the object was to hit the center, the bullseye. If it missed the target, that was called sin. And so the idea here is sin is missing God's mark. Now it's important to understand, what is God's mark? Perfection, God's standards, okay? God's precepts, commands. Sin is missing the mark. So Adam sinned. Why? Because he missed the mark. Now the degree of sin is not what we're talking about right here. Because if you stop and think about what Adam did not build a golden calf or some form of pagan idol and then bow down and worship it. He did not create gross sexual perversive sin, like having sex with some of the animals and all of that. He simply ate fruit that God told him not to eat. And by doing that, he missed God's mark. But the consequences for missing God's mark was death or separation. We get to that in a moment. So then he says, you know, that whatever the law says, okay, it speaks to those that are subject to the law, so that every mouth may be shut, and the whole world may be subject to God's judgment. But I want to go to read verse 20, because in connection to how we just defined sin, notice he says, for no one would be justified in his sight by the works of the law, because the knowledge of sin knowledge of sin comes through the law. Now, sin is something, and it's very interesting because when we think about Adam, his choice, because sin is always a choice. Sin is never, oops, I accidentally do that. It's always, you can almost say sin is willful. Now, let's acknowledge when you go back and you read the law of Moses, there are willful and unwillful trespasses, okay? So, for example, let's say you're in your neighborhood, you see a stop sign, and you intentionally run the stop sign, right? I just say sometimes the temptation, and it made me guilty. Oh, why is the stop sign here? And I run through it. That's a willful trespass. An unwillful trespass would be, and this happens, some of this happens all the time, that there's no stop sign there before, so you're used to going through that intersection, and then all of a sudden they put a stop sign there. You don't realize the stop sign is there, and you run the stop sign. That would be an unwillful trespass. You still broke the law because the stop sign was there. You still broke it. You broke the law, but it was an unwillful. In the context that we're talking about here is that the principle of sin that works in man, and we go back to Adam, and this is something that is, oh my God, I'm always baffled when I think about Adam. That Adam, we have a sinful nature, and what we see here, that there's no one righteous, not even one. Well, that's a part of our nature. But Adam, remember, Adam sinned. He just made a choice to sin, and that's baffling. Same thing with Lucifer, Satan, right? He made a choice to sin, and there was no sin nature in them. They just made a choice to disobey God. Now, when it comes to us, notice he says that the knowledge of sin comes through the law. Now, what is the law? The law is God's precepts. It is God's commands for righteous living. It is his standard of living, his standard of being right. Okay? The law is. However, what we see is that the law incites sin. It doesn't promote us keeping the law. But when you think about what God's law, the umbrella of the law is every morality, standard of morality, of goodness, but it's defined by God. So now, in the law of Moses, which we see God instituting in Israel, there were commands and precepts that Israel was to do, but it also spelled out what was the morality that was based upon the law. Okay, so when he says the knowledge of sin comes to the law, so when the law says thou shalt not covet, now what happened, and it stirred in us who are sinful beings, but the goodness of the law, or the goodness of the command, is stirred in us the sin nature. So thou shalt not covet, we covet. Thou shalt not lust, we lust. Okay. And what the law incited was what? The condemnation that we fall under for God. So he says, now we know that whatever the law says, it speaks to those that are subject to the law, so that every mouth may be shut and the whole world may be subject to God's judgment. And of course, the ultimate of God's judgment is, and here's where people get confused today. Why is God unjust? Because he's going to send us to hell. That's God's judgment. That is the price for rejecting the gospel, okay, is God's judgment. In other words, if you look at it from God's creation, right? You look at it from God's creation. And that was just a hypothetical. this phone right here, right, is my phone. I can do what I will with this phone, right? If this phone ceases to please me, ceases to be useful to me, I'm going to what? Throw it away because it's my phone. And that's a bad hypothetical comparison, I know. But when we think about God, who's the creator of all of this, of all creation, the idea that creation, we miss the mark, we sin. So what is the result of that? God says, I'm throwing it away. Except there is a redemptive part, which we'll get to later. But the idea is that you cannot exist or live in God's creation when you have missed his mark. So we are all subject to God's judgment. We don't have it in us to be good enough to avoid God's judgment. So we are all subject to God's judgment. Now, this word justify is extremely important. That's what I'm saying. All these words are important. The word justify, in the same words when you say just, justice, justify, okay, is a legal term that is the legal process of declaring or making someone right. Now, we just said we are all guilty in his sight, right? We are all subject to God's judgment. And so the just, and what God is telling us here is, how can I be right in God's sight? We're all guilty. We're all subject to God's judgment. How can I be made right? How can I avoid this judgment? Well, he is telling us here in verse 20 how what won't work. And that is, you cannot be made right by the works of the law. You cannot be made right by doing good deeds. You cannot be made right by living holy. You cannot. Okay. So the word justify is the legal process of making us right. We start off with, remember, we're guilty before God. There's no one righteous. There's no one good. We start off with that, and we cannot be made right, okay, by any works of the law. And the term works means what? The deeds of, doing the deeds, doing the things of the law, the deeds of the law. We cannot be made right by the works of the law. All right, so that's what that word justify means. So he says, for no one will be justified. Now, the other word I want to break down is this. Look at this here. But now, apart from the law, the righteousness of God. So the term righteousness, so when we look at the word just, so the word, um, when we say just or justify, it is to be legally made process. Now, let's say, for example, you get arrested. Maybe for any crime, then you get arrested, you're charged with a crime, then you have to be what? The legal process of being made right, to being justified. You go through the court process. You stand before a judge, you stand before a jury. Evidence is presented, and the case is made. And when the jury either finds you guilty or acquits you, or a judge can do that. But let's just say in this case, if they acquit you, you will have then been legally set free. You've been legally what? Justified. And as a result of that, you now stand right. So the word righteous then is then the position to be in right standing, to be in good standing. The word righteous means to be in good standing with God. This is our subject right here, to be in good standing. Now remember in verse 20, no one will be justified in his sight. So how do we be justified or made right with the result that we are in right standing. In other words, in God's sight, we are good. We are justified. And notice the word faith. So the word faith, now the word faith, look at the verse 22, that is God's righteousness through faith in Christ Jesus to all who believe. So the word faith and believe, pretty much the same word. One is the noun and the other one is the verb. And usually in the New Testament, the word faith is the noun, and then the word believe is the verb. Okay? And it means to be persuaded by. That's what the word means, to be persuaded by. I believe because I am persuaded by the gospel. I'm persuaded by the gospel message. I believe the gospel message. So that's what faith is, to put one's trust, to put one's hope, to put one's, to be persuaded by. Faith and belief, okay? All right. Again, I'm going to come back and I'm going to and go back and break these all down. But look at the word. So look at the word grace, and the word grace here. The textbook definition of word grace is God's unmerited favor. But then the thing is, so what is the favor? The favor is given by God, okay, who freely, out of his goodwill, bestows a favor without considering how good or deserving you are to receive his goodness, to receive his favor. That's important. That word, that's important to the word grace. Now, the word redemption, okay, the word redemption is means to buy, and in the Roman kind of culture here, there were kind of three applications of this word redemption. Think of a slave who was a slave, and then he could have bought his way out of slavery altogether. Okay, the other one, he could have bought his way out of slavery. Um, uh, but that's kind of the redemption price. By the way, it's the blood. But a slave could have been, okay, set free, paid his debt, set free. That's redemption. He bought his way out of slavery. Another word of redemption is to buy your way out of slavery, never to ever return to slavery again. It's complete. I will never be a slave again. And then the other redemption part would be to buy yourself out of slavery, but also then to become a Roman citizen or to become a member of someone's household. That's redemption. Now, the word propitiation, also the very interesting word, because the word propitiation, it means the sacrifice that satisfies. That's very important. This is actually what they call a transliteration here, because this word's kind of survived. But the word, it means Jesus' sacrifice, Jesus' offering, Jesus' redemption. Okay, his redemption is what satisfied God. Now, if you remember, no one would be justified in his sight. Well, Jesus' redemption satisfied God in his sight. His redemption satisfied God in his sight. And just to show you, if I have time, let me go here. Come on. I want to go here quickly to Colossians 3. Let me show you this in terms of what redemption or propitiation. Look at verse 21 here. Colossians 1, verse 21. Once you were alienated and hostile in your minds because of your evil actions, but now he has reconciled you by his physical body through his death to present you, now get this, to present you holy, faultless, and blameless before him. By the way, the King James Version says in his sight. So my point is, notice it is the death of Jesus through his body that God, and this is propitiation. In other words, God looks at what Jesus did and he is satisfied with what Jesus accomplished, what Jesus did. Okay. Now, when I come back next time, we're going to deal with breaking these words down. I wanted to take the time, though, that say that, look, these are what these words mean. So when you read them, there's a cognitive register, right, in your mind of what they mean. And that's going to be very important. Very, very important. But we'll pick it up next time. Don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought, a comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome, and I'll see you next time.